Okay, you guys ready to start?
Yeah, sure.
When is your friend actually joining us, or
I don't know.
did I go through a whole maze?
Where's Buzzkirk?
What? Oh, Buzzkirk's out today. He has a hit.
He has a hit?
He had to be on something.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would that we were all so fortunate. No, I'm happy to be here. I really am. Okay.
You better be. This is a two-parter.
You see the background?
Yeah.
All right. Good.
I see.
Looks like Iron Man's getting blown.
No. What the hell are you talking? What are you talking about?
Lewis, people are listening. Okay.
Well, it
Lewis,
does look like Pac-Man
language.
is blowing Iron Man.
You could
Look
say
at
it in
the
a nicer. You could say it in a nicer way, Lewis. Are you? Tell me when you're done eating your apple, so we could
I'm
start.
good.
Since you're on.
Should I be recording
Lady
this?
Servicing?
Yes, please.
start
Just as a
yeah.
backup. And Judah, let me give you rights too.
See, I didn't even get rights.
There we go. Oh, John Douglas is here.
I'm recording.
Oh my God! Look at that! Look at that picture. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's like the dream team from the movie.
I love the name too, John Douglas. Okay, you guys ready?
No. Yes. No.
Lewis, tell me when you're done with the apple. We do have breaks that you could chew. It's a little disconcerting watching you eat an apple while I'm trying to talk.
Go.
Man.
Okay, you guys ready, Ben?
I ready as I'm ever going to be.
Okay, that makes two of us. Want to welcome everybody to the 4 esoterics minus 1 today. We're missing Buzzkirk, so it's 3 esoterics. We are a show about pretty much anything but politics, and you could find us at amgreatness.com, also on YouTube and iTunes and all those places, and Twitter. Ben, please give us the Twitter handle.
At numeral 4 esoterics, ESOTERICS.
Perfect. We follow Carlin's rules here, and please be dressed. That's the other rule. Yes, Ben?
If you insist.
I insist the top half of us be dressed, okay?
All right.
That's the best I could ask for. And today we're discussing 80s music. And one of the things, actually, interestingly enough, your friend that was texting that we gave the Zoom link to, Lewis, brought up that's not here, brought up an idea of 80s music because I spoke in a past show about going to Grossinger's, and at 4 years old, being able to listen to Phil Silvers. But at the same time, in the 80s came out the movie with one of the best soundtracks, which was Dirty Dancing.
Dirty Dancing came out in the 80s, or was it 1990?
No, it was the 80s.
I'll look it up. By the way, once again, thank you, Yehuda, for the introduction. And I also want to point out the two things that Ben has been very charitable. He took some time off of his shoot from The White Shadow. He's in the midst of shooting and is joining us today. He's still in costume. And to those, I leave it all open to the audience to make their own judgment. But if you look at his background, I am fairly confident, given the lighting, that Pac-Man is servicing Iron Man.
I liked how you said that in a much cleaner way.
Nice.
I forgot to say the 3 esoterics, Louis Fine, and of course, managing editor at AM Greatness, Ben Boychuk, and probably one of the best editors in the business. I say
Thank you.
Truly one of the best editors in the business. If you want to write something, send it to Ben. He will make it glamorous and look great.
I'll stand over the corpse and I'll shout, "Live, damn you, live," as I pound on the chest, and it works sometimes. A lot of times, not all the time, but most of the time.
And we're discussing 80s music, and the biggest question is, why does 80s music still resonate? And by the way, if you want to join the chat, just raise your hand and put your question in. I am reading the chat box, but it's an interesting question. It's 30 years ago at this point, and people still love the 80s. And Ben, I know you're an 80s fan. What is it that you think music from the 80s? Why does it still resonate so much?
Well, it's got a good beat and you can dance to it. But also, I was looking through various Spotify 80s playlists last night, and I had a horrifying realization, which was that it was a pretty bad decade for music. But and
You see,
I mean
that's the knock on it, and this is where I am going to humbly disagree with you, because when you think about the 80s music, it was two things. First of all, it created the MTV, the revolution of it, what was MTV, right?
right.
And secondly, there were tons of movies that were laced with music specifically made for those movies.
Yes, that's true. However, it also gave us, Rick Astley.
Oh my God, don't knock the Astley. Come on, never going to give you up one of the best songs ever written.
I have to go now. I have to.
You just invited yourself to get rickrolled.
Something has come up. I'm sorry. I gotta go. No, look, it's I loved. So if you grew up now, you grew up in New York.
Yes, sir.
What was the top 40 station in New York in the 80s?
Lewis Z100. Lewis also could help me. Lewis
100.3 and 95.5. Scott Shannon was the host of the Morning Zoo on Z100.
Okay.
And by the way, good call on figuring out that Judah's from New York. Not a lot of people would catch that.
No,
and by the way, and just for the record, Lewis had the same radio stations that I did.
Yeah. In New Jersey.
In New Jersey, yeah.
Right.
And by the way, Ben, how many are you on your last Zoom gym class? Because thanks for helping out with that.
Anyways, from the guy who is wearing the same uniform that he's been wearing for the past 5 years.
Yes, but you're dressed as a white Trayvon Martin.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's get back
I'm actually wearing my Murder Hornets shirt.
If Ronald Reagan had another brother.
Ben, let's get back to it.
Right.
95.5.
So now in LA, the top 40 station, and it's kind of a hip hop station now, really, I think. But the top 40 station in LA was Kiss FM 102.7. And I didn't really listen to that station. I listened to 95.5 in LA was KLOS, still is KLOS. Album oriented rock. In the early 80s, there was 94.7 KMET, which was the classic rock station before it was called classic rock, the late lamented KMET. And then in the mid to late 80s into the early 90s, there was 105.5 KNAC, which was the heavy metal station, which was my station.
We had 98.7.
But you still haven't answered why 80s music still resonates, because when you look at
it's poppy. I hinted at it with my glib initial answer, which is that it had a good beat and you could dance to it. It was poppy. It was memorable. They had memorable hooks.
Yes.
It was, it was a lot of synthesizer, but even the guitar driven stuff, it was bright. It was sunny.
Happy. It was happy.
It was happy-ish. Yeah. I mean, you can find. I mean, this
not Euro. Depeche Mode, quite depressing.
Happy-ish. 99 Loft Balloons is a protest about the deployment of Pershing missiles in Europe and the imminent collapse of civilization.
And Genesis did.
And Midnight Oil did, Beds Are Burning, which was about nuclear war.
I can, for every you can find all kinds of exceptions to the general rule, but the general rule was we're the Go-Go's, for God's sake, and the Bangles and
perhaps it was a clash of reality and fantasy at all mixed into one.
Sure. So let me make a point here. I'm going to make a blanket generalization, which I don't normally do.
Yes.
I'm going to say that 80s music, but for two very notable exceptions, is a British phenomenon, even though many of those British bands were one-hit wonders, but the album of the decade was 1984, Van Halen's. And with the exception of Van Halen, the other American who owned the 80s was Michael Jackson.
Okay,
Yes.
I mean, but you could also say, I mean, there was Guns N' Roses.
Motley
There was-
Crue.
Guns N' Roses I associate more with the 90s.
Sorry, Ben?
Motley Crue.
Motley Crue, Poison. But by the way, Lewis, their first album, Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, came out in '86. But
Yeah,
again,
I think it
Your
was
Illusion.
87. Use Your Illusion was like 1990.
91.
And the November Rain.
Yeah. But getting back to it, Ben, you're right. There was a certain happiness to the music. There was the words, the lyrics were aspiring, whether it was Peter Gabriel, Salisbury Hill, or, there was just tons of, it wasn't grunge. It wasn't depressing.
Well, Michael Jackson had a top hit by denouncing his alleged bastard son.
When was
Billie
that?
Jean.
That wasn't in the 80s.
Yes, it was Billie Jean.
Oh, yeah, that's
The
right.
songs about molesting kids came later.
Okay.
Very
good.
And Lewis's take on music is far different than most people's takes. But you had the hair bands, you had so many things. Like you said, you had the Bangles, the glam rock, all that different stuff. I think if you were a music fan in the 80s, there was nobody that couldn't find the genre that they associated with.
But there's one, and you spoke about MTV.
Wipe your face!
I know, Lewis.
For God's sake.
You know what? The guy said I'd like it, and frankly, I don't. But anyway, so I want to say this. MTV, yes, revolutionary, but it omitted, for most of the decade, rap. And it's a legitimate criticism against MTV, because if you go back and you watch those videos, and I think one of the reasons we're having this conversation about 80s music is because it's the first decade of the mass popularization of music videos. But rap was excluded from that. They played almost nothing.
Except one.
Right.
And that was when they added Aerosmith to it.
Right. Walk This Way.
Yeah. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to the 4 Esoterics -1 today with Louis Fine, Ben Boychuk. And we are going to take a 30-second break. John Douglas, feel free, whoever's listening, feel free to ask questions and slam Louis as much as possible. So Ben, take us away.
Well, if you are listening to this, you are almost certainly hearing it. You might be hearing it on YouTube or iTunes, but odds are you're listening to it at American Greatness, and we appreciate that. But what we really want you to do, we want you to be listening to our podcast. We want you to listen to a show like this one, the 4 Esoterics. But we also want you to be reading writers like Victor Davis Hanson on Mondays and Conrad Black on Tuesdays and Fridays, Julie Kelly on Tuesdays and Fridays, and all sorts of great writers, especially on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And so thank you very much for reading American Greatness at www.amgreatness.com. The best is yet to come.
Great
Thank
song,
you.
by the way.
Thank you, and welcome back to the 4 Esoterics. Producer girlfriend, if you could, John Douglas has actually a very interesting question and statement.
This just in from the chat.
Yeah.
From John Douglas to the board.
Not
to be too cliched, but music, especially pop music, is a soundtrack of our lives. The 80s music and the general feeling of the time was generally upbeat and less cynical. The 90s and beyond generally were cynical or bleak. The maintaining popularity harkens back to, possibly Rose intended, memories of the time. Even the darker ones you mentioned only were dark once you really listen to the lyrics.
Is this the SAT? Is this the SAT writing portion? When the guy wrote an essay.
But it's a Lewis, don't offend our guests. And it's a fine he raises a great point, to which goes back to a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the darkness of movies today and television. The 80s does harken back to a time, a more simplistic time, good versus evil, music was, music was fun to listen to. Even Depeche Mode made a song about suicide listenable with blasphemous rumors.
One show did more for 80s music during that decade than any other show. Name it.
One show. Repeat the question.
Cosby Show.
One show did, as a series, did more for 80s music than any other.
Miami Vice.
Correct.
Yep.
I'm happy you said that because I was going to be like growing pains.
Because as I mentioned a couple of shows back, I didn't have much of a life either in high school or
okay, Ben, I think it's safe to assume none of us did. Okay?
Well, yeah. But Friday nights at 10 o'clock on CBS,
NBC Thursday.
Friday NBC. Night. That's right. God,
Friday nights.
Edit that out, producer girlfriend, please. Friday nights at 10 o'clock on NBC. Yes, Miami Vice with G. Gordon Liddy
and Bruce Willis. All the amazing cameos or guest appearances. But what they did, which was so important, was they had the money, or they spent the money to use the actual cuts. Awesome mug. Rather than if you tuned in to say Knight Rider, where they were using a cheap cover of Glory,
like Bosom Buddies with Billy Joel's My Life, right?
Right, because it costs money, so they'll call up some starving musician in the valley and say, "Do it."
You raise a great point, by the way. I'll just tell you this. Last night, producer girlfriend and I were watching. There are these 5-minute videos of how songs got made, and the guy from Survivor was on the band
Eye of the Tiger.
And what happened was he got home, a voicemail was on his machine, which no longer exists, right? We don't have voicemail machines. And it was a message from Sylvester. It was a message from Sylvester Stallone saying, I want you to write, I like your band. I want you to write for a song for us. So he calls back and he's like, Sylvester? And he goes, call me Sly. And he said, I really want you to write, I love your music. I want you to write us a song. And he sent them, I guess, the dailies, and it was like they were playing Queen at the time. And he calls him back and he says to Sylvester Stallone, he goes, why don't you just use Queen? And he says, we can't afford the publishing, and hence Eye of the Tiger came out, which is love it or hate it, or I don't know how you could hate that song, was born.
I got the cassette after seeing the movie.
I bought that. I used to work out to the Rocky soundtracks. I mean, they were just in.
When you say work out, like a heavy fork with the cottage cheese?
No, I do the treadmill in my mother's bedroom.
I could only imagine that treadmill from like 1971.
No. It was fairly new. And by the way, John, don't think you suffer from verbal diarrhea. If anybody wins that award, is Lewis.
Yes, I've got verbal dysentery.
Yeah, we were actually giving him that award at the end of the year. But think about the movies. Let's go back to the movies. You had Footloose, Dirty Dancing, Top Gun. You had movies that were basically music videos.
Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F.
Do you know, right? Glenn Fry, his only solo songs, oddly written by,
He was also on Miami Vice. Smuggler's Blues.
Yeah. I mean, that song was written by, it's going to drive me crazy. The guy from Michigan, can't think of his name right now. Anywho,
talking about
the Night Moves guy.
Yeah, Night Moves. Bob Seger, right? Yeah. One of the most underrated musicians of our ever. And but I think there was a certain, like John said, there was a certain happiness. There was a certain, and why is that so wrong? They try to darken us so much. My question to you, Ben and Lewis and John, is what is it about today that they will just not let us enjoy being happy?
Well, it's not a monoculture anymore, so we're not exposed to the same things. And it was the decade of music videos. And I remember when Thriller, the video for Thriller came out, directed by John Landis. It was the first $1 million music video.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember as a kid seeing a report on CBS News about the video, and then it debuted on MTV, and it was a huge phenomenon. But I would argue that the band that had the most consistently good music videos was Duran Duran.
Oh, without a doubt, exceptional music videos. Their music videos,
View to a Kill.
Yeah, Hungry Like a Wolf.
Yeah,
I mean, just incredible. But I also wanted, it was the last decade, now that I think about it, I don't know why Alan Thicke came to my head, but it was the last decade really where TV shows had creative theme songs.
Well, Alan Thicke, a musician in his own right, theme song to Different Strokes.
Facts of Life. You
By
know,
the way, I did chat with Mindy Cohn, true story, many years ago on J-Date. Nothing became of it.
No kidding.
I totally serious. She was
Lewis,
studying.
remember what I said to you. Do me, Lewis, you have to do us a favor. When you're being about to be serious, go like this with your hat.
What am I like? Is that my tell in this Mammoth podcast?
Yes. That shake your hat. And okay, so you.
And she was studying at the University of Judaism.
Did
and
she?
I said, I remember you as a game show contestant on body language. Everybody Google that. And she said, thanks. And I think that's where we left it.
So who didn't want to go out with who is the better question.
I would have sooner done the disabled girl than Mindy Cohn.
I love
Or
you.
was she like she was retarded, or she had cerebral palsy? Is there a difference?
Oh my God.
I have two music videos that I think are just great.
Thank you.
I think you have to talk about Aha's Take on Me.
Oh,
Thank you. Saw it
Which
in a
is-
movie theater. That's where
Which is brilliant. And I, it's interesting because at one point I was mentoring a young woman who was going to art school, and I showed her this music video. She's just naturally gifted at drawing, and I showed her this music video, and even a millennial, she was 15 at the time. It was so she was blown away by it. So it's even resonating with today's audience, which I think is really great. The second one I want to talk about, which I just think is completely badass in so many respects, is Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love. And it's interesting because for me, who was very young during the 80s, the music that I listened to during that time was generally music that my mom listened to. And I will never forget this. Like, I remember being at a wedding with my mom and my stepdad. And I just, at the time, like, my mom dressed so 80s. She just was like, she still is cool, but my mom just was like total, when I look back on it, total 80s babe, right? And so a lot of my music growing up was stuff that she listened to, the Eurythmics, the Footloose soundtrack, which was absolutely brilliant. Stevie Nicks, right, exactly, like Stevie Nicks, Oingo Boingo. David Bowie was like my mom and I still our favorite.
Oingo Boingo last week with the John Hughes discussion,
right? And so, but every time I see Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love, even as a grown woman, I want to be one of those women. And I know that's probably like the worst thing in the world I could say as a woman today. But wow, they're still like super hot.
I think it's got it's very much in its own way a feminist manifesto. It's very empowering toward women, I think, who watch it. I was going to say this also about videos. MJ is equal to Duran Duran because he had Beat It, which was, and you've got Eddie Van Halen, who did that guitar solo for free. He got no royalties. He didn't ask for them. So you got Beat It, you got Billie Jean, you got Thriller, but then you've got Say with Paul McCartney.
Yeah, this is what's fun about talking about this, is because John actually raises a good point. It also seemed to be really the birth of the period when people started to take on the attitude of turning up their noses and seeming to look down on popular music. And it's a great point, because I know Ben did it a little bit, and I know Ben did it in jest a little bit because, Ozzy was huge in the 80s. But the 80s was the last time I could remember, and I was in school at the time, and I can't imagine kids in school today arguing over whether they like Taylor Swift better or Ariana Grande better, however you pronounce her name, better.
I don't know. I mean, maybe they do. It's possible they do.
You have a kid in school or just graduated high school?
I've got two. I mean, I've got my daughter is big into, I mean, huge into Billie Eilish. And I think about my parents putting up with the music that I wanted to listen to. And I understand now because I've tried. God, I have tried so hard.
By the way, no, but
to understand Billie Eilish, and I don't get it. But it's not necessarily for me to get. It's for them to get. And
right, but the difference is everybody gets Tom Petty. Everybody gets
also some great videos.
Everybody gets the Traveling Wilburys.
Well, I don't know about that. I know I really don't know about that. But it's possible that you're right. I mean, I think about. It's possible that you're right. I remember one of many road trips that we took when I was a kid. We would go out for 2-3 weeks and travel the country, and occasionally my parents would indulge me and pop a cassette tape of mine in the player. And my dad hated most of what he had to endure, but he liked the Doors for some reason.
But that's the 60s.
I love the Doors.
I mean,
but that was the 60s. But my point is,
resonates today. But I remember being in school, Ben, and I had friends that were listening to Paula Abdul and other bands, and I was a massive fan of Tesla. And I remember just arguing, going, I don't get it. I get it that she's attractive, but I don't get the music. I couldn't understand how somebody could prefer, Billy Joel to Elton John.
Some great videos, Longest Time.
Yeah, I just couldn't. Just tons of it. There was so much in the 80s. I think we tend to forget. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to the 4 Esoterics -1 today with Louis Fine and Ben Boychuk. We're discussing 80s music, 80s, why it's resonating, and questions from the people in chat are greatly appreciated. And with that, we'll go to a 30-second break with Ben Boychuk.
Yes. So it's Memorial Day weekend. Finally, at last, the weather is beautiful. If you happen to be in Southern California, you might want to check out Stone Creek Bistro in the mountains of Southern California in the San Bernardino Mountains in Blue Jay, California, near Lake Arrowhead. Stone Creek Bistro has an amazing fried chicken sandwich. It's taken the mountain by storm, and as soon as they're free to open up for dine-in again, it's going to take Southern California and maybe even the nation by storm. But in the meantime, you can drool over pictures on their Facebook page, but go to their website, www.stonecreekbistro.com.
And for the record, Ben, there is Instagram where you could post the pictures.
Yes, they're on. Yes, they have an Instagram account.
But
too.
a good idea, Ben, when you post pictures of food, do it before the meal, not after you ate it. Okay, or do a before and after.
The restaurant does that. I do the afters. The restaurant does the befores.
And Louis, I love that that this place that looks great. I want to Postmate it and have them do a 2-hour ride over here,
right?
To deliver food. But I want to welcome everybody back. Louis Fine, Ben Boychuk, and the three.
May I share something from the board?
Yes, please.
This is also from John Douglas. The dismissive attitude by critics concerning 1980s popular music misses the point. The point being that these bands, and by these bands, I mean all musicians, British, American, a global phenomenon, much like the United Colors of Benetton. This music defined a period, call it an epoch, if you will. The reason I say this is because in the midst of confinement, unable to leave my apartment and urinating in mason jars, I have found that I am very prolix in my descriptions of various issues, including, but not limited to, 1980s music.
John, just so you know, I know you didn't send that. And when you get, Louis is like our Rickles. And to use the right word nicely, he welcomes everybody by crapping on them. And Louis is a believer in and everybody gets their chops busted. That's what makes him special. And
I have a great debate of the 80s.
yes.
And maybe this is more for the female crowd, but were you a Debbie Gibson fan or were you a Tiffany fan?
Oh my God.
That's
Oh
like,
my
are you a
God.
Luke Perry fan or a Jason Priestley fan?
That's exactly right.
Luke Perry.
Rico or Depp?
That's what are you, crazy?
I remember of the 3 episodes Dennis Miller had on his short-lived late night show.
Which was brilliant.
Yes.
Didn't he win like 5 Emmys?
Well, no, this isn't the HBO one. This is one he did on Fox.
Oh, yes,
after,
yes,
Joan
yes.
Rivers crashed and burned. They brought in Dennis Miller, and he did in his monologue. He had an amazing fit of Tourette's where he just kept saying, "Rico,
Depp. Greco.
Greco." Sorry, see, that's my
by the
note.
way, Johnny
Pretty much
Depp,
up
by the
state.
way, 100%. But
The
you know,
greatest movie Johnny Greco was ever in.
Johnny Greco.
What's his name?
Richard Grieco.
Richard.
Okay, so he's in a movie.
John, well, hold on a second, John. As you could see, you should never be offended by Lewis.
He's in a movie that is superb with, among others, Roger Daltrey and Linda Hunt, where Linda Hunt plays a murderous spy whose chief weapon is his gold necklace. And Greco is with his high school class with their French teacher in Paris on a summer trip. And all I remember from Linda Hunt is her words, "No, I killed your father," takes off the bracelet, which becomes this whip that she uses to kill people. And when I was online standing behind her at a pizzeria, I had to fight the temptation to say, "No, I killed your father." And here's a woman, I say woman in quotes, who won an Oscar for playing a man in a great film, The Year of Living Dangerously.
And this is note to self: Louis Fine will never be doing promos for movies. Getting back to producer girlfriend's point about Debbie Gibson or Tiffany.
I think we're alone now.
By the way, which is my favorite band of today is the Killers, who have the most 80s of sound. But they did a concert where they essentially said she stole it from who originally sang that song, and and basically they said we're taking it back from Tiffany, and the sad part is most people growing up in the 80s think that Tiffany probably wrote that song.
Right.
Here's an 80s video that never was. If you go to YouTube, search.
How about tell people to do it after the show?
That's just assumed, Yehuda. So if they search "Sweep the Leg," it is
"You're the best around. No one's ever gonna take you down. You're the best."
That video for that song. The song is "Sweep the Leg."
Yeah.
You're in for an amazing treat.
By the way, here's the thing, we talk about great bands. Let's not forget Chicago and Peter Cetera, "Glory of Love," which was an amazing song for Karate Kid.
We could do a whole show just on ballads from the 80s.
Oh my! Well, we'll do that on Tuesday. That's why I wanted to do part 2 because make it what you will. I used to in my younger years, I used to help teenagers at risk, and this is a true story where I took them to a Poison concert. And I had backstage passes. I told you the story that the drummer from Billy Idol was friends with CC, got us backstage. But I remember being with 20,000 people. This is about 2001 or whatever. And I remember looking at 20,000 people still dressed like it was 1987.
Sure.
And every single one of them holding like a candle, a lighter.
A lighter, yeah.
Every rose has its thorn.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking people love to make fun of them, but these people did leave a lasting impression with something they created.
There's no way that can compare to the impression you must have made in your Jewish version of Scared Straight, where you went to a yeshiva and took these kids and said, "This is where you'll end up if you stop reading Torah.
Yes, that's exactly the.
You want to live like this?
Yeah.
Having sex all the time? Drugs, alcohol? Scared straight.
They were past that point.
With
They
little
were
K for kosher.
they were a little past that point. And but Ben, what do you think about that? I mean, you're right about the ballad thing. But what are some of your favorite songs from movies? I mean, it was an exceptional time that movies, like you said, TV had Miami Vice, and movies just were Top Gun.
Well, I was going to mention Top Gun. Yeah, that's a big one.
You're missing, come on, the obvious, the John Hughes canon.
Well, we talked a bit. That's what I was going to seg into. We talked a bit about that on the John Hughes episode, just how essential the soundtracks are to those films. And so, we could almost do a separate episode just on movie soundtracks, but
that's my point. In the beginning of this, you said you sort of were poo-pooing on the 80s, and now you're thinking of 4 different, because we forget how many bands came out of the 80s.
Well, and I think what to circle back quickly to the point I was trying to make about the radio stations in LA. Kiss FM in the 1980s, Kiss FM was, my goodness, that was really the last time when it came to top 40 music that you had a real diverse kind of a list where you had Motown, you would have certain heavy metal songs, you would have mainstream pop songs, you had
that is our adopted rescue dogs barking.
What's the dog's name?
Sabrina and Evie. So I want to
and I encourage everyone to search after this.
Yeah.
To watch the trailer. Great film, White Dog, with Paul Winfield and Christy McNichol.
I love how he just interrupted your totally good conversation.
I know. No, it's just.
And by the way, I want to welcome Kristen, who I believe is Lewis' childhood friend. So we know that Lewis has existed pre-2017. Yes, so go on.
Another name for this show could very well be the 4 non sequiturs. Anyway,
the 4.
And speaking of non sequiturs, the original version of I Think We're Alone Now was done by Tommy James and the Shondells.
There you are. And I want to welcome Kristen. And Kristen, you missed the beginning of the show because a text you had sent to Lewis about my time at Grossinger's when I was 4 years old and getting to listen to Phil Silvers. But at the same time, it evokes Grossinger's. And John, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. There were a bunch of hotels in upstate New York, the Catskills, in the Catskills about the Borscht Belt comedians. But that's what Dirty Dancing was about. And I think that happens to have probably the best soundtrack of the 1980s.
Well, Kristen, just for the edification of our listeners and viewers, she worked and lived in Sullivan County in the Catskills. So she's like our Shabbos goy for this.
That's actually very cool. And I think about Time of My Life, Hungry Eyes, I think they used a Ronnie Spector song in there. I think it was just, Eric Carmen was fantastic. Who actually, have you ever noticed, looks a little bit like Chris Kattan? But it was a special time.
I don't think we can talk about the 80s without bringing up Prince.
You see, there you go. You were poo-pooing all stuff.
I was, but I'm not.
And now and this is John Douglas's point. This is
right.
Like you poo-pooed everything, and now you're starting to bring up and have fondness for all this stuff.
First of all, this is a slander. Okay, as I brought it up and I made a joke, and now you're treating me like I'm a snob.
Okay,
which I am, but I'm not.
Let me ask you a question. As a Sabbath fan, did you enjoy Ozzy's solo?
No. Actually, I did not. I preferred. The first 2 albums are good. Like Blizzard of Oz is a great album, which came out just after Heaven and Hell in 1980, and Heaven and Hell is a perfect record.
What about Danzig? I mean, there's so many different.
Love Danzig, but of course Danzig, Danzig came out of the Misfits, and the Misfits, he and that was his project, and he wasn't happy with any of the band members really, and didn't like the way they played, and so they broke up, and he went off and did his own thing. I saw Danzig 2 years ago, I think.
And by the way,
playing all that great stuff from the 80s.
Kristen, John, by the way, don't be scared to ask more questions or say statements. Louis, when Louis knocks you, it's the biggest compliment a human being can get. Not getting knocked by Louis is like, if he doesn't make fun of you, it means he doesn't like you. Right, Ben?
That's correct. Prince, Purple Rain, one of the great rock and roll albums. I mean, but also soul, but one of the great albums of the 80s, and also a film soundtrack because there was a film associated with it. But Prince was a tremendous artist who happened to wear purple suits with great big shoulder pads on them, and had big hair, and that's pretty much the 1980s summed up in a sense.
To complement your point, and this is something that I got this. I'm reading this now live. This is from Frederick Douglass about saying if you're talking about MTV and you don't mention J.J. Jackson, then you're disrespecting all the original VJs, including Mark Goodman, Alan Hunter, Martha Quinn, Nina Blackwood, because J.J. Jackson was a seminal figure, no token, a seminal figure in the birth of music television. When I leave my home, if that day happens, I think that I will be on a lot of medication when I go to the supermarket to buy lactose-free milk, margarine, diapers. Doesn't indicate.
Louis, fine, everybody. You are listening to the 40 Soterics -1. You didn't shake your hat, Louis. I can't tell when you're being serious or not. Shake the hat. Right. And we're going to take a 30-second break. Ben?
Well, if you're watching this and listening to this, again, you're almost certainly seeing it at American Greatness, and we're so glad that you are watching and listening to our podcast. But we want you reading the articles too, and of course, you're going to find some of the best right-leaning thinkers around, from Victor Davis Hanson and Conrad Black to Julie Kelly and
William Ring.
I'm sorry?
William Ring.
Ed Ring.
Ed Ring.
He rebaptized him, who's on the site today, actually. And so visit us daily at amgreatness.com. We're live 7 days a week, 24/7. Be sure to check out Liz Sheld's Morning Greatness, where you get a roundup of all the most important stories of the day. That's at www.amgreatness.com.
And if you just tuned in, you're listening to the 4 Esoterics with Louis Fine, Ben Boychuk, managing editor of AM Greatness. We have guests on the we have people chatting in. John, please don't feel bad. Don't worry. Louis is not going to. And Kristen, the same thing. We would love to know a Louis childhood story. I look back at the 80s, and as you're doing that, I know you're sort of being facetious, Ben, but you had some amazing Euro bands, and the reason I bring that up is because I used to love watching the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's one of my favorite things to watch, but I feel
but now they let everybody in.
No, but they let everybody in except for European artists. It is the most American-centric thing. I mean, when you think about it, that Depeche Mode was supposed to be inducted this year, finally got in, you know, with their work. It's sort of, I mean, we forget Peter Gabriel was a rock star.
And
Yeah.
briefly a member of Genesis.
And briefly a member of Genesis. And oh, by the way, I can't
Well,
stand
like 10 years if that's brief.
yeah, and I can't stand. I hate those people that say I love Genesis when Peter Gabriel was there. And I'm like,
I never met those people.
I have. There's always the one.
What's the Phil Collins song?
I'm that guy.
You're that guy.
Look, the Gabriel Genesis years were great. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a great album.
You're like the same person that would say about what's it called? Who is the band? The guy that tripped on acid and he never came back from the Beatles.
Pink. You're thinking of Pink
Floyd, right?
Sid Barrett.
Now I just don't listen to Pink Floyd because he's a Nazi. But
I had an encounter with Roger Waters. True story.
Yeah.
I was very polite. I said we were at a sushi place, not very good, even though it has a great rating on Yelp. Not that I go to Yelp, but my friend did. We're walking out, and it was I did a Jack Ruby. I said, Roger Waters? And he said, yes. And I said, and I shook his hand. I did the two hands on one hand, my two hands on his one hand. And I said, I just want to tell you, and I did it in this tone, I just want to tell you, Israel will continue to flourish long after you're gone. Thank you so much.
Did you actually do that?
Yes.
Lewis, I got to tell you, Lewis, I got to tell you, no matter what you ever say again, I love you.
The woman he was with, whether it was a friend, a girlfriend, whatever, because he didn't even know he had been shot yet. Like the rest, everybody else is like, Lee Harvey's been shot. Oswald has been shot. She went nuts. She jumped up like the seat of the chair was electrified and started screaming, of course it will. Of course it will because of you people. And I was Jack Handy. He didn't know what happened. He was bleeding out. And his lady friend realized I did a Jack Ruby just right there. They were going to put him in the van, take him away, and I show up.
That's great.
And the double handshake, the two hands.
And just I love Lewis.
Let me make this point though about Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd is not just Roger Waters.
Oh, David Gilmour's a god.
And to my knowledge, haven't they disowned Roger Waters?
Yes.
The other day they banned him from the website. They banned him from everything. David,
because he's an ass.
Right. And you're either in the Gilmour camp or the Waters camp. And I've always been in the Waters, in the Gilmour's camp, even before I knew he was a Nazi. And by the way, there's one band we're forgetting. I'm not saying them, they're in no way near Nazis, but they were from Germany, which was the Scorpions. Right? They've sold over 100 million albums. They had one of the most amazing videos after the wall fell with Winds of Change. That a band like that isn't considered for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just goes to show you how centric it is on American bands.
Here's a video question for you, because I remember seeing it when it first came out, and they played it on the radio forever. And if I were to watch it now, the premise of the video is absurd, which is Phil Collins and a black man get in a helicopter, and it just goes over London, and they play the song because that was the budget.
What was it? I Could Feel It in the Air Tonight?
No. I don't know the song, but he did this song. And it was very catchy, but even though I can't remember it. But the video was the two of them boarding a helicopter and just flying above London.
Okay, so Lewis, who are you listening to? Oh,
Philip Bailey is what Frederick Douglass says.
Yeah. Is that the name?
What's the name of the song?
What's the name of the song? John, you do this, by the way, just so you know, you do have the same name as the guy that started the forensic department at the FBI, I believe. Was it Robert
Easy
Douglas?
Lover. That's it. Easy. She's an easy.
But I'm correct about that. Didn't John Douglas start the forensic department at the FBI?
I think that's right. I want Lewis to continue his Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong impersonation of Phil Collins.
Yeah, but Kristen texted me, tell Isaac I want to talk, but you won't let me. And she said, yes, Phil Collins and Black Man get into a helicopter, which would be a great joke.
Yes, Kristen, all you have to do is
FBI
raise your hand and we'll get to you.
The
If you wanna
profiling
be
program.
on screen, Kristen, you're more than welcome. But let me ask you a question, Louis. What are some of your favorite songs that have left an indelible mark on you? Obviously, you're a huge Michael Jackson fan, as much as you're
Not huge. I just remember I mean, it was the best-selling album. Is Thriller still the best-selling album?
I believe it probably is.
Let's
There's-
find
Here,
out.
this is why it deserves to be the best-selling album. And I'm just going to do this from memory. Ase da maku sa, ase da maku sa, which, from what I understand, he's dead, so he can't sue me, was plagiarized. But and he says the words, "You're a vegetable." Ase da maku sa. You know what I'm talking about? Somebody,
No, if
Frederick
somebody
Douglass,
just
tell
tuned
us the
in,
name of the song.
if somebody just tuned in, they would think they were watching like a special bus, like the Short Bus, the podcast.
Right, but those are the lyrics. Say to the maku sa, you're a vegetable.
Okay, John Douglas told us the Eagles overtook it, but who was before the Eagles and Michael Jackson, who had the first best-selling album of all time? That's a 70s band. Boston.
Very creative name.
Yeah, and by the way, Ben, what about Rush? Rush
Well,
is
yeah, I mean, Rush's real commercial high point was the 1980s, and that's, I mean, one of the first albums I ever bought with my own money, because this was 1981, so I would have been 10 years old, was Rush's Signals album, which I think it's 1982. It was 1982. Signals came out in 81. No, excuse me. Moving Pictures came out in 81. Signals came out in 82.
You're missing a great 80s band whose frontman also did an amazing video in his own right. The Police.
Oh my God, that's the point.
Yeah.
Journey.
And Sting's video for which he did when he was touring with Branford Marsalis. What's the song? It's a great video. If you love someone, set them free.
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass, you know what I'm talking about. Free. Or how about Live Aid? Do they know it's Christmas?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, by the way. You know what I realized, by the way, is in Europe, in England especially, Christmas songs are extremely, bands, like it's like a competition every year of who could hit number one on the, with the best Christmas song. And I don't know why I thought of that random fact, but because of what you just said.
One band, one album, one decade, Culture Club.
Yeah, and then,
I'll tumble for you.
And then
do you really want to hurt me?
And what about George Michael?
Come Chameleon.
What about George Michael?
Easy Whisper, Wham.
Okay,
Careless Whisper.
Right, whatever.
Ben, Black Crows.
What's my cucumber? I'm George Michael.
Black Crows, late 80s.
I don't really consider
Ben, what is it that you want to talk about in the next show? Because we're going to have to do a part 2 on Tuesday. Hopefully, Julie will be joining us. John Douglas will be back. So
great Julie Kelly may be joining us for the next episode of this, in which I think we should talk about ballads, and I think we should delve more deeply into soundtracks, which is one of the
so next episode is John Douglas, Kristen, I want you back on Tuesday when we do this at the same time. Louis, what do you have to say?
I'm having an autistic fit, so let me say it. Another great frontman who had 2 songs, which were also 2 great videos.
John Waite?
No, David Lee Roth, and they were both covers. California Girls.
Yeah.
And
Just a Gigolo.
But John Waite, by the way, could be the same thing, because John Waite had Missing You, and then I think he became part of that band called Bad English.
Bad English is no.
I think you've got it in reverse.
No, Missing You was first, and then Bad English.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like I think Bad English was like members of Journey.
The Babies came before that, says John Douglas.
And you can't talk about the 80s without talking about the upstanding citizenship.
I love John Douglas. He's like our
wait.
ombudsman.
This
is great.
Can I just tell you that the AP English essay that John Douglas did, 5. That's the highest score you can get. You're going to get college credit for that, even if it's on Zoom. But I was going to say, what was I saying right before that? We were talking about bad English. We were talking about.
You were saying about the 2 favorite videos,
right?
With the one person had 2 great videos.
All right. Well, David Lee Roth, but I don't.
We're in bad shape when Lewis loses the thread.
Yeah. And producer girlfriend, we want to thank you. Any last thoughts from you, producer girlfriend?
No, I'm good. I'll wait for the next episode.
Okay.
I think that really captures the spirit of our show.
Yeah.
Lewis, any last words?
I want to thank everybody who joined us, including John Douglas, who is obviously a furloughed high school English teacher, and I welcome his commentary. And I think he's done an amazing job. And I'll take us out.
Okay, Lewis.
Wait. Let him finish.
Yeah,
go ahead, Lewis. Go ahead.
Because he listened. He's contributed. So let me give the man his proper respects. Your show speaks to an urge that we all sense, but few can articulate. And that is, music is, though cliched as the expression may be, the soundtrack of our lives. When I lost custody of my children, my wife said in front of a judge that I would never see them again. Music has kept my hopes alive. Your show has provided the sustenance I need, along with the lawful ownership of multiple firearms, to keep going in the midst of this period in which many people have decided to take their own lives instead of powering through and enduring what is our generation's pandemic. Thank you, Joshua, for hosting this show. Producer girlfriend, who obviously is in the midst of some kind of deranged, delusional brain disorder because she lives with Yehuda. And to the gym teacher who is part of the 4 Esoterics, thank you, sir.
And Ben, just give us a quick preview of what we're discussing next time.
Well, we're going to discuss deeply 80s soundtracks, the best ballads of the decade, and Black Sabbath. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
And tell us what that song was. I say to makusa. I'm a vegetable.
And on that,
what was it? I don't know. What
Michael Jackson's Thriller.
And on that note, the 4 Esoterics, they have a great weekend. We will talk to you later, or have a great weekday whenever you are listening to this. Right. We'll talk to you later.
Cheers.